everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and yes, we're starting off the playthrough here with part number 1. We're going to continue on after the solo setup video, which we already did on the channel. If you haven't checked that out or the unboxing, there'll be links here showing up in the top right hand corner of your screen that you can quickly jump to those. But if you've already checked those out, then you are caught all the way up, and at this particular point in time, we're going to load back into the game that we've already set up and begin in the very first round of the game in the action phase. But one thing I want to show you guys that I think is really cool is inside of this app here, there is a section here for rules, as you can see on the screen, and this will take you to an online document for the rules, which will pop up in a browser. The other really cool thing is a collection feature, which we've seen through things like Mansions of Madness and Imperial Assault before. So I'd like to show you what's inside of that option before we load into our game. So inside of the collection here is where you're going to be beginning to add in pieces of what you currently own and don't own, or if you own it all as time progresses and more products are released, you can turn things on and off depending on which products you enjoy having mixed in and which ones you don't want to be a part of the action for whatever reason. You can see here that the core experience is obviously enabled by default because otherwise you can't play the game. You have to have the core set. But the other really cool thing is inside of this particular pre-built or pre-final version of the app, it's actually showing us what appears to be one of the very first expansions for this particular game, which appears to be 2 miniatures here for some villains, essentially, they're going to be added into the game. So that's quite interesting and will likely follow coming soon, as it says, the core release box set. So it looks like there'll be individual small packs that'll add content, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some larger expansion boxes as well. So this might be similar to how Imperial Assault essentially handles itself from Fantasy Flight Games in terms of adding a figure every now and then. But the really cool thing is I'm guessing that there'll be gameplay elements coming along with those figures. It won't just be miniatures only. So that's what I'm really interested in. And of course, expansions will add more tiles and other things like that, and possibly mechanics as well, and replayability in the variability of the scenarios and campaigns you go through. So that's enough about the collection piece. Let's jump back out. And what I'm going to do now is load into the game here. So once the option comes up, we can load our game. We know we got 5 slots. We use the very top one. It picks up exactly where you left off, gives you a nice timestamp there of where you were and how much, what time of night it was and when you were actually playing this particular one. So you can see that you were up till 2 or 3 in the morning playing the game. So in this particular case, we're resuming exactly back in where we were originally here. So as you can see, you can scroll around and move right to the action. Now this is the first thing I want to talk about, guys, and it was a really funny goof on my part during the solo setup. The only thing that I messed up was actually the placement of tile 30A or 301A, and I wanted to correct that in this video because it was mentioned by an individual. Jen's actually on the channel mentioned this, and I really want to thank her for pointing it out because we're able to quickly make that adjustment. But essentially, I'll show you in the app here, my 2 connection here into this particular tile was actually here and here. So it was actually off by a whole hex. Whereas at the very beginning of the app, it stated that both the heroes should show up in this location, essentially. But as you can see here, it needs to be over to the left. So I've already made that correction on the game board. We're going to end up going there anyway, because technically right now, we're moving into what's called the action phase. And I want to go through the different steps of what's involved and what we can possibly do. So as you can see here, the map tile 301A has now been shuffled over just 1 hex to the west, currently on screen here. So it sits here instead of where it was here. That was the only mistake that I made during the solo setup that I definitely want to correct before we go forward, because of course the game's all about modular tiles basically branching out from each other. And of course, if you have something out of position, that's going to cause issues. So definitely thank you guys for pointing that out. So now we're going to get into what a round entails. And currently the app told us at the end of the last video, we were in the action phase. So that is the first phase of a typical game round. You're going to go through a round which will encompass an action phase where you're going to have heroes moving around, interacting with the world, attacking enemies, all that good stuff. The shadow phase is second, so during that phase the enemies move and attack heroes, and other darkness threats grow stronger, so bad things happen. The rally phase is the final phase, and during that phase the heroes prepare for the next round. That's pretty much it. Those are the 3 major phases. Now there's more going on inside of each of those, of course. The first one we'll talk about is the action phase and what you can do inside of it. During the action phase, each hero takes a turn by performing actions to search, fight, and journey through Middle Earth. Now, when you're deciding which of your heroes goes first, you're freely able to choose that, and round by round you can change the order in which heroes activate that makes the most strategic sense for you. So I could have Aragorn in this very first round go first, and then the next round that comes around I could have Legolas go first. There's no order. You get to choose that. Of course, if you're playing with multiple characters in solo play, then you have even more choice in terms of who you activate first and who you activate in the middle or last. And then if you're playing with other people, well, that becomes a conversation between the individuals involved. So playing solo, I have 2 characters. I'm definitely going to be using that to my advantage to trigger who I want to start their hero turn. So on a hero turn, once I've decided that, and in this case, round 1 is going to be Aragorn, I'm going to decide what 2 actions Aragorn is going to do. So this begs the question, what actions can Aragorn do on his turn? Well, you have the option to do a travel action, an attack action, and an interact action. And you can choose, if you'd like, to do the same action twice, or you could choose 2 separate actions. So we should now talk about what each of these different actions entail. We'll start off with the travel action. If I decide to take a travel action, we're going to go over how that can work. So essentially, when you take a travel action, you're spending one of your 2 actions you can do on a hero's turn. If I chose Aragorn to go ahead and use a travel action, I gain 2 movement points that I can use how I choose. So how do movement points work? Well, on these tiles, you can see they're divided into sections with white lines either around the border of a particular location or even sometimes in the middle of a tile like this. And this whole area right here where my character sits is considered the same area. So if I want to spend a travel action or use an action to travel, I gain 2 movement points that I can use in order to traverse the land of Middle Earth. Gaining those 2 movement points allows me to do something like this, cross this border into this particular area. And that's really, it doesn't matter where you place your miniature, anywhere inside of those borders that you crossed is okay. And then again, if I wanted to use another movement point, I could technically cross over here, for instance. Now, technically this wouldn't be an efficient use of movement because, as you can see, there's actually a connection down here leading into this particular tile where I could just easily skip across. You're going to want to pay attention to what's connecting and how you can move across the land in the most efficient way, because that will definitely come into play. Another thing to note with traveling is that you do get the ability to stop and perform your second action, or if you happen to have a section action, in between a travel action. So for instance, if I choose to travel first, I could go 1 movement point into here, use my second action to interact with this token here, which we'll talk about later, and then when it's completed, I get to continue with the movement point that I had from my first action of travel, and I could move there, for instance. I could even pop myself back to where I was. So kind of get out there, complete an objective or explore something, and then come back, whether you're trying to be in a particular position or there's enemies in a particular area that have now popped up. So sometimes that's actually worth it strategy-wise. And then there's also the other case where you don't want to spend all your movements. You simply just move 1 and decide not to move any further than that because you'd like to stop right there. And that's also completely valid as well. That is the first half of what you can do during a travel action. Now, what may happen as a result of a travel action when you're spending your movement points to move through Middle-earth is you're going to see tiles in the game that have this exploration token in the center of it. When you see that, it's considering this tile an unexplored tile, which basically means if you happen to use a travel action to gain movement points, which then you use to spend to move into that tile. So for instance, I have a travel action which I choose to use. I get 2 movement points. I choose to use 1 to move into this space. The moment I do, I need to take this particular exploration token, flip it over to the inspiration side of the token, and that inspiration token then goes on my hero card of the character that moved into the tile, basically saying, congratulations for exploring that particular area, here's 1 inspiration. Now, the other thing you don't want to forget to do when you go ahead and move into an unexplored tile is the second is considered explored, like this one is now. You want to go into the app, click on the token in the map there, and then it'll unveil something inside of the app. We'll see this when we actually do it during the gameplay, but I wanted to explain this and also make a note that this is not going to cost you an action to do. This is just part of exploring. It's just as you spend a travel action to gain 2 movement points, if you happen to be moving moving into tiles that have expiration tokens on them, you just go ahead and resolve those expiration tokens, gain that inspiration, go to the app and update the app based on your movement and that expiration token and where it is situated, but it does not cost you an action to do that. You're still just technically traveling around and spending your movement points. So I'd still have, as of after spending this 1 point of movement, another point of movement to spend. So if I happen to have a tile over here that had another exploration token, I could choose to pop over to the next tile that's over there and I'd be resolving another exploration token. So it can chain together. You can be exploring a lot of areas and unveiling a lot of things without actually burning all of your actions, which is quite interesting and can accomplish quite a bit on your turn. Now, the next action that we could take is an attack action. Now, I'm not going to go through this action until we actually see some enemies show up on the board, because it'll make a lot more sense when they're actually in position. So we'll talk about the action of attacking later on. We're going to skip over to interact action. So the interact action is the final action you could perform as a potential one of the two actions on your hero's turn. And when you're doing that, you're really just encountering points of interest on the board. So they're going to be indicated by search tokens like this one right here, or by a threat token, or by a person token. And again, you are freely able to go ahead into the app and click on these particular tokens in order to find out more about what's there. Now, remember earlier on in the solo setup, it mentioned what had happened at this particular location and token right here where this person was. It had mentioned that there was a bunch of individuals that had sealed off an area, but if we wanted to click on it again to either remind ourselves what it is, or like if there's a reason to even go there, you can click on that, no problem, through the app. It does not cost you an action, but what's important to note is if you ever see one of the buttons with an arrow on it, that means that if you go ahead and push through with your interact action by choosing to interact with a token, which of course you have to actually be in the space with the token to do so, then it will cost you an actual action. So that's very much worth noting, that you can, once tokens have shown up on the board, go ahead to your app and basically reference between them to be like, well, I've got 3 options here. Which one do I want to do? You can go to the app. It'll give you additional information on each one, and that will help to steer you in whichever direction you're trying to accomplish your objectives in. So you've got search, person, and threat tokens. Those are the 3 that you can choose to basically interact with. And that is essentially the 3 major actions of the action phase. So Aragorn is going to kick things off for us. So what we're going to do as the first option is, again, you always want to be looking at your abilities and the cards that you have prepared and your items to see if anything ever applies to give boosts or potential advantages to you strategically. And I noticed right off the get-go, we have the well-provisioned card here that's prepared. And it says at the start of your turn, you may discard this skill for you and a nearby hero to scout to. Well, I am nearby Legolas, as we're in the exact same location. So I'm going to go ahead and use well-provisioned, discarding this card, and we're going to be able to go ahead and scout to on both characters, again allowing us to prepare a card, which is awesome because we can fill that slot up again, or we can and in addition to, I should say, take the other card and either place it on top of the skill deck or at the bottom, depending on how good it is. So let's go ahead for Aragorn and find out which 2 cards he gets. So again, remember, anytime we pull cards that have the inspiration icon here in the top left-hand corner, we can always spend our inspiration token to turn it into a success. So this is still good, potentially. Again, we'd have to burn inspiration to do it, but it's a success. In terms of the actual skill on the card, though, if we chose to prepare this one, it says, when you test your... And this one actually relates back to your wisdom. You may discard this skill to add 1 success. So that's interesting. If it's a wisdom-based test, then you can kind of push yourself towards a success. Not bad. Let's see what the second card is. And oh, look at that. We got knowledge. So before you test, now this one doesn't have any icon up there, so it wouldn't result in any success. But this one is a knowledge keyword, and it says before you test, you may discard this skill to test your wisdom instead. And my wisdom is 4. It's my highest. And it's, of course, one of Aragorn's major cards, which could be really handy. I don't know if you guys can see that on screen there, but it says Aragorn 4. And then it says sprint 1. During your turn, discard to move 1 space. So very interesting there. So you have kind of 2 different uses for that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and decide to probably keep this one, and we'll leave this one on top of the deck so that we can potentially... Oh, that's a tough choice, actually. Do we want to risk putting it to the bottom and having this not be a success on top? That's where it gets hard. That's where it's tricky. I'm going to do it. I'm going to leave it on top. I'm going to leave it on top. And we're going to put this one in the prepared state. Now, another thing to note, guys, the maximum amount of cards you can have prepared is 4. If you ever have more than 4 cards prepared, then you have to discard one. It's also important to note that items are not considered prepared because when you use the keyword prepared or that terminology, it's specific to skill cards coming from this deck or the one card that you start the game prepared with from the get-go. So in this case, I have 2 prepared cards and I could have 2 more prepared cards as well. We'll talk more about items, but you can see here there's limits on those as well. So it depends on whether it's particularly like a cloak or a body type equipped item or something in your hand. There are limits to how much of those you can actually have on you as well, of course. Right now we are way under those limits, so we're not going to go into those details, but they're really straightforward. In terms of the prepared cards, that's the most important. If you ever get to a value over 4, you have to discard down, and you discard that skill into your discard pile and keep the 4 that you have. So for Legolas, let's go ahead and reveal 2 cards from the skill deck. The first one we have here is Immortality. It's an innate skill. It says rest 2, discard at the end of turn to discard 2 face down wounds, or I guess this would be damage actually, or fear. So you got damage and fear. These are 2 bad things that basically can occur to your character. You don't want either one to be reaching the max fear or max damage or bad things happen. We'll definitely talk more about that maybe when we get to the attack action and flush that out. But this is actually a pretty good one because you can also strike 2. So when you attack, discard to add 2 hits. It could really make him have a pretty devastating attack. And you also can see here we already have a tactic that says when you attack, discard to add 3 hits. So we could really be piling on some serious damage with this one. There's no icon up top, which does not help us in tests. So let's go to the next card. And another one that doesn't help us out in terms of tests. This one says tireless. At the end of your turn, you may discard this skill to perform an action that you have not performed this turn. So if you're trying to do multiple actions, like if you did a travel action, even if you did 2 travel actions, you could choose to do one of the other ones, or you could do a travel action and interact and then choose to fight with this card, for instance. So that's not a bad one either. We have to decide which of these 2 different ones we want to prepare, and then which one we want to either place on top of the deck or underneath. All right, I'm going to decide to go ahead with Immortality. We're going to prep this one and put it as a prepared skill in amongst the rest of the items that I have here. Again, I have 2 right now prepared and 2 items. And we'll take Tireless, and I'm actually going to put Tireless to the bottom. You might be wondering why I'm doing that, but I want to have a better chance of success when I'm pulling skill cards here, when I choose to move Legolas later on to go interact with some tokens. We're kind of playing both characters a little differently. One is setting themselves up for potential success with the fact that I can use Inspiration in Aragorn, but with Legolas, I'm going to have to hope that the cards are in my favor with that one. So now we've gone ahead and used that very first card because we were truly activating Aragorn. We can go back to Aragorn and begin our actual actions, as there's nothing else I want to do that has start of turn effects. So Aragorn is going to use a travel action, and the first movement will be to move into this zone over here. Now I'm going to use my second action to actually go ahead and search this particular token. In order to do so, we're going to go to the app and click on that token and find out what happens, remembering that I still have 1 movement point to use afterwards to complete my travel action. All right, so we're going to go ahead and select the search token in this location. A faint buzzing sound alerts you to something amiss in the area. Do you want to search? And this was the arrow I was speaking about earlier. As soon as you click this arrow, that is me spending my interact action. So I am allowed to just click on these tokens freely and read every one of them. So I might as well do that even just to give us an idea of the different tokens in the area, because it doesn't actually cost us an action to do so. So I'm going to cancel this for now. We'll also go ahead and click on these tokens as we're allowed to do, specified by the rules. A dense fog blankets the area, covering an already treacherous land. Okay, so something bad is probably over there because it's a threat. And then over here, you note the garb mimics that of Breelanders, but their accents are varied. These are not merely local riffraff. You pause and consider what is your best approach, and you have these 3 options. So again, something major is going on over there, but we're not going to go ahead and do any of them yet because I don't want to spend... I have to be in that location, of course, to interact in the first place. So we'll come back here to the search token. A faint buzzing sound alerts you to something amiss in the area, and we're going to go ahead and search. The buzzing is coming from a swarm of insects, greedily feasting on a spill of an unidentifiable liquid. So now we're going to do a test All right, Aragorn, we're now going to be testing our wit, and our wit is currently 3 on the hero cards. We'll be revealing 3 skill cards looking for a success, and as mentioned there, we just needed 1 success on this wit test, because there was a 1, there was a comma, and then 1. So we're going to go ahead here and reveal. We know this one because we actually set this one up, so we do have the option of succeeding if we so choose to spend an inspiration token, but let's see if we get lucky, potentially, and just get a success that we need. And look at that, we don't even need to spend that particular token anymore, which is great news. And we'll go ahead and reveal the third one as we have to. We can't stop. And it was another success, so we're gonna end up burning another success there. So all those are discarded, and we can continue that as a pass. Now there's an option there, you'll notice in the app when we were just in there, it said pass or fail. Some of these tests are going to be simply that, pass or fail. Other ones will have you accumulating a number of successes and then telling the app how many successes you got, and of course the outcome might change based on how successful you are. Of course, so getting 2 successes like I just did could be really beneficial in one of those types of tests, but for this one where it's just a straight pass or fail on 1 success, not as good and kind of kills us from getting a success later on. All right, so we got 2 successes, which was more than enough for us to pass, so we'll click on this and find out what happens. The insects are feasting on a spill of wildflower honey, and you even find an unbroken chunk of wax comb to pocket for later. Gain 2 inspiration and then discard the search token. So that actually worked out really good. We didn't even have to spend an inspiration token to get this, and we just gained 2, and we're still under our max for Aragorn, so that's fantastic. Let's head back to his hero card and throw those on. And we're also going to discard the search token. We'll now go ahead and remove the search token from the board, and we'll head over to Aragorn's card and give him 2 inspiration. So Aragorn will gain 2 inspiration, bringing him to a total of 3, and he's got a max of 4 that he can potentially hold, so that was awesome and worth every second of effort there. So this works out really, really well, because now I can use the last movement point that I had from my travel action to move Aragorn into this location, and when he does that, the second he moves in, we have to interact with the token that is in the app, but also we essentially go ahead and flip this thing over and we gain another inspiration. So Aragorn has actually in 1 turn maxed out his inspiration, which is fantastic. It's really going to help him when the tests start coming his way in the near future. Now we need to get Legolas kind of on board with the same type of mentality. Legolas can hold 5 inspiration, but this is really great. So let's go find out what happens now that we've explored this southern tile. All right, you guys ready for this? Let's explore this tile. A lone stone arc sits impassively by the banks of a stagnant pond. Discard the exploration token and gain 1 inspiration. Okay, so we did that, we got that covered, and as the game rules stated, we just gained that inspiration. So that's the norm that you can expect when you move into those particular tiles, and maybe there's times where other things will occur. Could happen right after we hit continue here, we'll see. Ah, look at this. A large chest is concealed in this patch of shadows, kept safe by a sturdy but corroded lock. Place a search token as indicated. So we'll definitely be doing that in a second. We'll continue on in case there's more to this. Your journey continues. So the search token will land right here, and now we have completed Aragorn's turn. We're going to move over to Legolas and see what Legolas wants to do. So Legolas is going to start off his turn by using a travel action to gain 2 movement points. He's going to move from this tile here to this tile here, and he's going to be wondering, what is this threat token all about? So let's go to the app. We're going to choose to interact with it as our second action. Remembering again, I can choose to move 1 point of movement afterwards. Now, one thing I want to do just before I go ahead here and interact with this threat token is I want to take a look at this. I don't know if I can do anything with this. This is just going to show you basically movements on the keyboard as I'm using this on a PC as to how you can either do this PC or on your actual tablet or iPhone or Android device, anything like that. So it's just about camera controls. I thought it might have something to do with the actual gameplay itself. One thing I haven't talked about as well is up here, this is basically considered like a threat bar, and essentially what happens here is if the threat bar ever gets all the way to 64, you lose the particular scenario you're playing through. Now, if the threat gets up to 15, and of course this is going to continue to go up and up and up, once we get to that phase of the game, you'll see how that starts moving, then basically a threat event occurs when it hits 15. That's what this whole bar is all about. Hopefully it clears it up. When the heroes are done their turn, and both of them have not gone yet, we would then hit the sand timer to advance to the next round. And we've got other things on screen. We won't talk with them just yet. We'll just continue on with the threat token that we want to interact with. The other thing that's really cool is that you can technically zoom in and out of the app if you want to, right down into you know, a much closer up view of what's going on here. So I'm going to go ahead now and click on this threat token. We'll see what happens. A dense fog blankets the area covering an already treacherous land. So let's search it. The ground beneath your feet becomes rocky and chocked with roots intent on tripping you up. Okay, so we're going to be testing here, and we need to gain, this is where I was talking about, we need more than just one success. In this particular case, we're going to likely need multiple successes. So let's hope that we can get that to happen. All right, so the good news is that this test involves agility, and that's something that Legolas is actually extremely strong in. So I've already put my guys, thankfully, in the best positions possible to perform things so far. We'll see how that continues to translate as we move along. Likely to change on us quite quickly, but we got 4 cards we can pull, and I don't have any abilities that are going to trigger to help me out in this. So I'm just pulling these cards, hoping for the best. I do have 1 inspiration token on Legolas, so I can hope that that pans out. Here we go, 4 cards. So this one right here will allow us to go ahead and use one of those inspiration tokens in order to get a success. Now this would just be 1 success at that point. We need multiple. We got another card here that does absolutely nothing in terms of successes for us, so that's not good. The next one here was another inspiration-based one, which is not good. We need to see a real success. I'm hoping that the next one is. Come on. Oh no, we pulled the misled card, which is a weakness card. So you're likely curious as to what actually happens when a weakness card gets pulled. It's not an auto fail or anything like that. It actually has more to do with stuffing your deck or skill deck with cards that basically provide absolutely no symbols that can be turned to successes or represent a success. So it really is just kind of cluttering up your skill deck. And the crazy thing is, as the adventure progresses, you may gain more weaknesses, meaning that the chances of seeing these things throughout your journey are basically going to hound you continuously. But in between adventures, from what I understand from the rule book, these things get cleaned up. So you're not always carrying them forever. But if I was to accumulate one right now, I would have it until the end of this particular adventure. So as of right now, this particular draw really didn't pan out in anything successful, as we got nothing through this one. We could potentially use 1 of our inspiration tokens to turn this one to a success, which I'm tempted to do. It might barely keep us from taking some damage, so I'll likely do that because at this point in time, things are not looking so good for Legolas. So I am going to go ahead with my 1 inspiration token and use it in order to turn one of the discarded cards into, that have that icon, into a success. So I at least have 1, and hopefully that prevents something nasty from happening. But 1 success is not the greatest, so we're probably going to still take some hits here. Let's go back to the app and see what happens. So just when you think that Legolas is great on his feet, things don't pan out so hot, and we only get to add 1 success into this particular test. Let's see what happens. You stumble as a rock rolls from beneath your foot, tumbling forward. Threat decreases by 2, suffer 2 damage, and then discard this threat token. So let's go ahead and talk about this. We'll head back to the game board. So the first thing that we saw in the app there was we saw the threat actually decrease by 2. Now, first off, we didn't have any threat in our threat bar up top, so that decrease of 2 didn't actually apply from what I'm seeing. If we had have had any threat in that bar, then that 1 success we gained would have actually helped mitigate the overall threat that's accumulating to potentially take us down and lose us the game. Now, the next step here says to suffer 2 damage. So how damage works is you go to those decks that we situated earlier, which have the same symbol on the top of the card, or at least on the back of the card, and you're going to be going ahead and revealing these one at a time and resolving them. So if I got 2 damage, I'm going to be resolving each card 1 at a time fully. So we'll flip this one over and see what we get. We got ourselves a cursed injury. That does not sound good. It says keep this card face up. If you would discard a face up damage flip it downward instead. So again, this has very much of the similar mechanic here going on with Mansions of Madness with the card flipping and, you know, holding on to damage, getting rid of damage, that type of thing. We can currently only have up to 4 damage on Legolas before things start getting iffy. So we're going to go ahead right now and say keep this card face up. So I'm going to put it above Legolas's card to remind us that we got that damage there. And now we're going to get the next card out of the damage deck and reveal that. This next one here says Weariness. We saw these, and it says flip this card face down. So we're going to go ahead and flip it face down. Now we can talk about what it means to have damage that's face down versus face up. All right, so let's talk about damage. So first off, we have 2 damage. Does not matter whether it's face up or face down, it counts as 2 damage. My limit is 4. If I ever hit 4 or go over for any reason, I immediately go to the app and I choose the party symbol in the bottom left-hand corner that's a green icon. I'll then go ahead and choose Legolas, going for a last stand. And at that point, the app will ask me whether it happened by fear or by damage. So in this case, damage. It will then throw a test at you, which will likely be like a life or death type situation, which is something you're going to have to try to survive or get through in order to probably continue on. Otherwise, something bad could happen. So I don't know yet. We haven't got there, but that's essentially the idea. That's the same as with fear, except you again would be telling the app that you are doing a last stand based on fear. Now, in terms of managing damage on your character, things get really interesting. So when you suffer damage like I did, I actually pulled 2 cards one at a time off of the damage deck, and you're supposed to reveal them, look at them, read them, do whatever it says on them, and follow their instructions. So as you saw, one said to keep it face up, one said to flip it down. We already know what both of these are. One is not so bad, and one kind of has an effect that's going to be slightly annoying. So what's important about that is you're not going to always have cards that are just straight up revealed to you. Some of the app will actually tell you in certain situations to receive 3 face down damage, meaning you'll get 3 cards like this, but you don't even know what's underneath of them, which is really nasty, because later on the app might say, flip 3 face down damage up, or, you know, something along those lines, or flip 3 damage up, something along those lines, which basically just triggers a whole bunch of nastiness all at once and a bunch of abilities that you may not even know were there that are going to be a detriment to you. What's really important to note, guys, is more so about how to get rid of them. So when you have the ability or the app tells you to be able to discard a wound, whether it comes from a card or the app or whatever, you have 2 ways you can discard. When you're told to go ahead and discard, whether it be through a card or through the app, you can choose to do it either face-up cards or face-down cards, but there is a distinction here. If it's a face-up card, you can truly select the card that you want to discard and pinpoint it and discard it. Unless, of course, it has an ability on it that kind of triggers when you do it. So, for instance, Cursed Injury says, if you would discard a face-up damage card, like this one, then you flip it face down instead. So it's like you kind of almost progressing it away eventually. Now, if I had to discard 1 damage and I was trying to use it, I could choose to use it on this, flip this over. It wouldn't get rid of it, but it would at least get closer to getting rid of it. The other thing I could do is I could go to any cards I have face down, and I can choose one at random. And that's really important to note. And this is where you want to be 100% careful about how you manage your damage, because there's an element there where you could potentially cheat, and it would kind of break the game. And you want to be careful of this, because there'll be times where damage is revealed like this. And for instance, this card, if I chose to discard this particular wound, knowing that I can pinpoint ones that are face up, it specifies on it that that if I would discard a face up card, I flip it down instead. So I would flip this over like this. Well, I know which one's which. I've seen both. So what happens is anytime that you have cards that are face down like this, later on, if it ever says to you, go ahead and discard a wound, and you have this situation where you know what these are, you're not supposed to know what order they're in before you discard it. And it's supposed to be a random discard for any card that has its back showing. So make sure you shuffle the cards before you actually choose a card at random to ensure that you're playing by the rules. This is really, really important. And that basically sums it up for not only damage, but also fear in terms of how you're handling those cards. And again, the app's going to instruct you in that way. And if you're confused by any of the terminology, the rules reference, it clears this up really, really nicely. All right, so let's get back to Legolas and what else he needs to do. So the app then instructed us to go ahead and remove the threat token from the board. And remember, remember, we still have 1 movement point left to spend, so I'm definitely going to go ahead now and have Legolas move into this location. But again, I can't do anything there because I've run out of actions, and now our action phase is complete. All right, so it's time to go ahead and continue past this, and that token then disappears. We're now going to say to the app that we are finished our action phase by going to the hourglass timer and see what happens. Are we going to end the action phase? Yes, we are. Shadow phase begins. The shadow deepens, though hope yet endures. The threat increases by 4. So this is the first time we're seeing the threat actually increase in the app. As you can see, the bar goes up by 4. And now we move to the rally phase. So sometimes that phase is not going to be all that bad. Like just some threat goes up. Obviously, as we go throughout this app, things are going to progress much faster and much nastier. And as I mentioned earlier, if we hit this particular area right here, we trigger what's called a threat event, which is not good. Each hero resets their deck and then scouts too. So this is really cool. We're going to go over to our characters, kind of preparing for the next round, and then continue on. Now, just to also add what could potentially happen during a shadow phase is enemies could activate if there are any on the board. Darkness is resolved if there's any necessary ones to resolve on the board. The threat increases. That's the only thing we saw in this very first phase. And the threat events are activated if the threat reaches a threshold. So those are kind of the things you can expect to see happening based on the game board. But again, remember, we didn't get that extra threat hit because we got that off the board. Legolas did his job and removed that token, which was good. So now we move to what's called the rally phase. So each hero resets their skill deck and then scouts 2 cards. Literally what this is taking everything that you discarded earlier for all your skill checks and just shuffling it back into your deck and then simply going through another scout 2 again. So we're going to do this for both characters, and I'm not going to show this as much going forward because I'll just do this myself, and we will be showing the scouting, just not so much of the resetting of the decks. All right, so we're going to go ahead with our scout here. We'll see how things pan out. So we got, ooh, look at that. We got Strider. That's a good one, and a success on it. But again, remember, we can prepare one of these or we can put it on top of our deck. So it becomes very tough to make these decisions because some of these success cards have some sweet, sweet abilities on them as well. So we got that one, and then oh my gosh, well, that made it a lot easier. I definitely want to toss that one again to the bottom. I don't know, every time I shuffle this seems to crop back up. This happened last time, so this is gonna go to the bottom. That's great news. So again, remember what these weaknesses do. They just clutter up your deck and basically stop you from having a better chance at being successful in the future on these skill checks. So I've tossed that to the bottom, and I'm gonna go ahead probably and just prepare this one because I think having a strike 3 is really handy. A guard 2 says discard to prevent damage or fear for a hero in your space. So that's handy. It could be for myself or for potentially Legolas as well, which is really good. Now I'm gonna have to double check to see whether or not it can actually affect Aragorn as well. Sometimes the terminology there can be interesting. I'll just be sure of that first, but we'll go ahead and we'll consider this one prepared. I could have put this on the well, yeah, I really want to prepare this one. There's just too many cool abilities on that not to. So now we have 3 abilities or skill cards prepared underneath Aragorn. All right, Legolas, let's scout and see what happens. We got ourselves Precise Strike. There's a success, but again, another card that we could potentially prepare. And then we got... okay, one that uses an inspiration token. So you know what I'm going to do? I already have Precise Strike prepared in his area, so I'm going to go ahead and choose to actually prepare this one, Keen Eyes. So this one says here, your ranged attacks, which we haven't had to talk about yet, but range basically just means 1 space away from your potential enemy, essentially, in terms of movement, 1 movement point worth of space away. So it says your ranged attacks can target enemies 1 additional space away, meaning now we could potentially hit somebody 2 spaces away. Pretty cool. That gives us some serious distance on our shots in the future. Very handy, so definitely something we want to use. And it says strike 2 when you attack, discard to add 2 hits. So 1 is something that you use to benefit from. The other is kind of an innate ability you always have. Very cool. Definitely taking Keen Eyes makes thematic sense. And now we have 3 prepared skills on Aragorn. And this success, we're going to definitely drop it on top of the skill deck so that we know we have something good happening for us when Legolas actually has to move into interacting with that person token near him. So now that we've successfully gone ahead and done this, we'll continue onwards. And we begin a brand new action phase. So we're going back to our heroes where we can decide who wants to activate first. Legolas or Aragorn. And in this case, I might actually have Legolas go first, as we have a person token to interact with that I'm really keen on seeing what happens. And because we know Legolas is already in this position, we don't even have to go back to the game board. We can literally just click on the token and see what happens. So it says, you note the garb mimics that of Brelanders, but their accents are varied. These are not merely local riffraff. You pause and consider, what is your best approach? Well met, friends. So kind of a friendly approach. We can sneak up and eavesdrop, kind of using what I guess would probably be our agility skill, maybe. And then, or step away from the tomb or else. So kind of basically go in there, guns blazing, try to attack them. So, you know, for the purposes of this, I'm going to try to sneak up and eavesdrop. Yeah, I do kind of want to incite some, you know, some stuff to happen, but I don't want to trigger a full-on war just yet. So I'm going to sneak up and eavesdrop, see what happens here. Slinking behind a tree, you attempt to get close enough to overhear the group's conversation. Now we have a test to perform. So this works out really good because we're testing our agility, which is something Legolas is very good at. It's actually his strongest skill in general. So 4 cards, and we know the top one is going to be a success, so that's a plus right out of the gate. So we flip this over, bam, there's 1 success. Let's see how many we can get in here. Oh, look at that, a 2nd success. That's awesome. A 3rd success. You've got to be kidding me. Okay, I knew it had to stop eventually. 3 is fantastic. This is probably going to give us some really good information. Let's head back to the app and see what happens. All right, so we're back here with 3 successes, which is fantastic, and we'll confirm this. I'm really hoping this gives us something good. It better. The ruffians are tense, but you overhear them discuss plans to loot 3 other ruins in the area before returning to their lair. Okay, so we got some information now. They're going to try to loot some other ruins in the area, 3 of them. Suddenly a crow shrieks and a bandit hisses. Quiet. We have guests. You hear blades drawn and footsteps growing closer. Become hidden, then discard this person token. Very cool. This is going to relate back to the boons that we set up earlier on. So we're going to be able to gain this for Legolas, and we're going to discard this person token off the board. So Legolas gains the boon Hidden, which says if you are attacked before you test, prevent all damage and discard this boon. That's awesome. When you attack, you may discard this boon to add a success, meaning that we can actually kind of beef up our attack because we did such a good job on that skill check in terms of being kind of stealthy based on our decision that we were able to gain a benefit from it. We're kind of attacking from the shadows per se if we wanted to do the latter half of that card. Pretty cool. So that person token has now been resolved and removed from the game board. So we'll continue on in the app here and see what happens. Oh, the first enemy. Your enemy shows no sign of mercy nor any inclination that they will accept the same in return. With malice in their eyes, they raise their weapons, ready to defend what they have stolen. Place 2 ruffians as indicated. So it appears that Legolas has found himself some friends, and we've got those miniatures on the game board. We also saw them pop up in the app. So let's head back to the app and continue onwards. So the 2 ruffians have been placed, and we'll continue forward. Objective updated, defeat the ruffians. So that is the main goal right now, is to take both of them down. So let's go ahead and continue. Thankfully, we have that element of surprise, which gives us additional hits, so that's awesome. And you'll notice down here at the very bottom of the track, we kind of now have a separate group area here where if we click on them, it'll actually tell us the different enemies that are here, and if we choose to attack them here, we can actually go ahead and select this button right here when we choose to make that attack, which I will certainly be doing. So, now that we've resolved that, we are likely going to have an attack actually be done. So we're going to have Legolas make an attack action against this particular enemy, being that Legolas started in this particular zone right here. Use 1 action to interact with the person token, so still has 1 action to spend. So I'll definitely go ahead and do that attack. So let's talk about how attack actions work, because we actually haven't had an attack action yet. So essentially, an attack allows a hero to attack an enemy group, and of course we know that group is going to be these 2 individuals which showed up in the app as an actual group. We looked into that group, we saw that they're each 5 in terms of wounds that they can take before they're taken down each. To perform an attack, we basically just have to pick an item that has a particular skill icon in the top left-hand corner. So you can see the great bow here on Legolas has this skill, and this skill correlates to his agility. So we know that this thing can actually perform an attack. Next, you have to decide and determine whether or not you have the range or the ability to attack in the first place. Now, if you have a melee weapon, like something like a sword, you have to be in the exact same quadrant of a tile to attack an enemy. Whereas Legolas, though, has this ranged icon in the top right-hand corner of his great bow, meaning he can attack another character another space away in the same zone as him, or because he's got keen eyes, 2 zones away from him now. So he's got lots of options. He definitely can use his great bow in the same quadrant he's in with these enemies. That's perfectly fine. And now we go ahead and we resolve what's called an attack test. So we are definitely targeting the group of the 2 individuals that have just popped up on that tile with Legolas. We're going to make an attack test now, and we have a little bit going on here because we have a great bow where when we pull based on the fact we're going to be using our agility, which will give us 4 cards off the skill deck, we'll be looking for as many successes as possible to then use here to either take 1 success to get 2 hits or 2 successes to get 5 hits. And you can accumulate as many of these successes as you can to try to take the whole group down if you want. We know the enemies are a total value of 10 damage or 10 hits that we need to take them both out. So we might need to even use some of these particular prepared cards, which we can discard on our turn in order to add hits, as they mentioned. But we're also weighing the fact that some of these have some really cool abilities, like Keen Eyes lets me shoot longer range. So if I discard it for 2 hits, I lose the ability. Or Immortality, which basically allows me to, at the end of the turn, discard 2 face down damage. Or Fear. Pretty handy too. So it gets tough decisions. And we have the hidden card where when you attack, you may discard the spoon to add a success, which could tie into the great bow. And a lot of things start bouncing in and amongst each other. You have to kind of figure out what's best. But let's go ahead and pull the 4 cards for this test and see how we do to start and go from there. So we got one that's going to be using inspiration token that we don't have, so that's not going to help us. We got another one that uses 2 inspiration, so this is not looking good so far. We might end up having to do something. Oh no, you know, we got all the successes at the beginning. Kind of hurt us a little bit. Oh wow, that was a complete miss across the board. Like, he shot his arrows and Legolas was just not feeling it today. So it really just comes down to, can we gather enough hits through discarding cards? So if I was to discard hidden, I can gain a success that will give me 2 hits. If I discard this card, it gives me 3 hits. That's 5 hits total. That would knock off 1 enemy. Then you go look at these 2 cards and you say, if you discard both of these, you get 2 hits for each of them. Meaning, I'm not going to be able to successfully take out both. It's just not going to happen. There's nothing else I can do to boost this. Now, it also says over here on the cloak, before you suffer wounds or fear, you may spend 1 inspiration to prevent them. That doesn't help for us. Our ability for our character doesn't help us. So it doesn't make sense to burn anything that we don't need to burn just yet. So we might as well think about how we can best make use of this smartly. So if I keep hidden instead of discarding it in order to get a success to gain 2 hits, if I keep it, the bonus is when I'm attacked back by the other figure, it says if you are attacked before you test, prevent all wounds and discard this boon. That could be huge in keeping Legolas from taking too much damage and going into a last stand situation. So it might make more sense to go after discarding 2 of these potential cards. Like Precise Strike makes sense because there's no ability attached to it and it's a guaranteed 3 hits. So we just need to decide which of the 2 between Immortality and Keen Eyes that we talked about earlier, which makes me sad. We have to get rid of one of these 2 to make sense of this. And you know what? At the end of the day, as much as I like Keen Eyes, I think I'm going to have to let that one go. So we're going to discard this one and this one to get the 5 hits that we need in order to apply damage and and be able to take out at least one of them. So now things are getting interesting here. We're definitely going to take an attack here. So we're going to go over here and hit this selection, which means we're attacking them. It then moves into this whole other section that we're going to have to go over in terms of what each of these 6 things mean. These are basically abilities that can potentially be added into your attack later on. We currently don't have any of these right now, but they basically just add layers to this attack engine, essentially. Different things that can cause damage, like getting past armor and all this other kind of stuff. Right now we have some enemies that just strictly have HP, but eventually you can have enemies that have armor and have other magical abilities and all this stuff that kind of use them as buffers or regeneration to keep them alive longer and be more of a pest. Plus there's bonuses involved potentially. We know based on how we did, we're going to be going ahead now and basically applying our success based on our attack that we just did. So let's go ahead and apply the hits that we've actually sustained against these enemies and put onto them. The ruffians have taken 5 total hits. So you can see it's actually subtracting the damage straight off of them, and that ends up killing one of them. That's as best as we could do, and you can see here, like, yes, I could discard all my other cards, but it wouldn't be enough to kill them. And if I need to do that later to actually get a successful kill, I will, but I'm not going to burn abilities to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit apply, and the app will say apply 5 hits. Yes. Just like that, it's going to basically register the fact that we remove 1 ruffian, which I'm going to go ahead and remove from the game board. We then continue. Then it says, can the enemy attack? And this is a very interesting question, and in this particular case, it can. So when there are enemies still left from a group that you just attack, depending on where they're situated and where you're situated, they can potentially attack back. So how do you determine whether they can attack back or not? Let's talk about that. So how do you know whether you can actually be attacked back by an enemy? It's pretty simple. If the enemy is in your space, like the enemy is in this case with Legolas, it can attack you. If the enemy portrait down below on the app actually has a ranged icon, then they can attack 1 space away. There will be enemies that can do that. This guy's not one of them, so if I had have shot him in some weird way where Legolas wasn't in the same zone as him, there would have been no ability for him to attack back based on this current portrait not having the ranged icon. But we're in the same spot as we saw earlier, so he's going to attack. So I go ahead and hit yes. Then we go to another screen here. It says a man unsheathes a huge sword and attacks. And then it states right here what negates. It also talks about the damage and fear. And we'll talk more about how this resolves right now. So this all worked out really well because my plan originally was knowing full well that I was likely not going to take out both of them, but because I rolled so high on the hiding side of things, I got this cool boon that basically now will trigger, because if I didn't have it, we'd be going into what's called a skill test to try to negate the damage, which is 2 damage and 1 fear that the app just showed us, which is going to put us in dangerous territory of actually going into a last stand situation if I can't stop it. And I'm using only my might based on the icon up here to negate that was shown in the app, and I only get 2 skill cards to try to find successes. And when you gain successes during this test, you're using them to negate either the damage or the fear that it's mentioning. And you can choose which side you want to negate, so you can use that to your advantage to keep yourself from being hurt too much in the damage department or the fear department. But because I have this card, I'm definitely going to use it. And it says, if you are attacked, which I was, before you test, meaning you still get to test, but before you test, prevent all damage and discard this boon. Doesn't stop the fear, it stops the damage. Makes thematic sense. You're hidden, stop being hit, doesn't make you any less scared. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to remove this card so that it guarantees we don't get hit by damage, but we know we still have 1 fear coming at us. And because of that 1 fear coming at us, we now need to pull the 2 skill cards from might and cross our fingers we can stop being, or become scared by what's happening. So here we go. We have probably a better chance now that we ditched a bunch of unsuccessful ones. Okay, that's not going to help us. So we have no inspiration to use to turn that to a success. So we're really hoping for something good here. Come on. No. So it looks like we are going to be taking 1 fear. So similar to when we took damage earlier on, we go ahead and we go to the fear deck though instead this time, and we're going to reveal it and actually look at the card, and we got Gloom, which says flip this card face down. So we have our first fear card on Legolas, which again is going up against the 6 total maximum he can have before he goes into a last stand check. So we did fairly good at avoiding the damage there. Thank goodness we were hidden. That could have been really bad when you actually think about it. That could have actually, if we weren't, it would have pushed us into a last stand super fast. So we got to take this guy down in the next one in order to not run into that situation again. We could be in some serious trouble. Maybe Aragorn will have to come up and help us. We'll have to see how it pans out. Well, that was certainly super close. So here we go. We're going to confirm this because we've already completed it. And just like that, it is now finished. Now, I know Aragorn would love to explore further south, but he wants to help out his friend Legolas, who's gotten himself into some trouble here. We don't want to leave Legolas alone. Plus, we know once Aragorn has finished his turn, we move into the shadow phase. And of course, we have an enemy on the board. This enemy is going to activate, which means another attack. Not something we really want to happen. So let's get Aragorn over there to try to help. So for a move action, we're going to go ahead and move 2 spaces. So across the border right here, and then 1 to get into this space with the enemy, which is fantastic. Kind of we have 2 against 1 going on here, and I do have the ability now to make an attack using Aragorn. So here's something about Aragorn's setup that I really like, and I want to talk about just so you guys understand. What's really cool is an ability here that he has prepared on him called Strider. It has a guard on it, and what guard means is you can discard this card to prevent 2 wounds or damage or fear for a hero in your space. So in other words, I could protect Legolas by being with him for a bit now, knowing that he has some damage on him and needs some help. Potentially, I could discard that at some point in time if Legolas was to be the target of an attack, which is fantastic. Of course, that would stop me from being able to use it as a strike 3 because it also causes me to discard it. But these are the kind of synergies that are really cool in the game with the skill cards that allow you to kind of bank a risk versus reward of when should you use a particular card for either defense or on the offensive. It really becomes quite interesting. Now on the attack side of things, I want to make an attack against this particular enemy. I'm obviously going to be using my sword. It has this icon right up here in the top left, which is going to relate back to might, which is 3. So I'd be basically pulling 3 cards off my skill deck to make this attack. Looking at the rest of what's going on here, this says that the travel garb would actually increase my fear limit by 1. So technically my fear limit for Aragorn, because he's wearing the travel garb, is actually 6, even though it says 5. That's good to know. Before you suffer face down wounds, you may prevent 1 of that wound. So that's also a really good one too. So before you would suffer face down, you can, wounds that are face down, you can actually prevent 1. So that's something definitely worth noting. This one's only good for a specific test that has to do with spirit. This one says before you test, you may discard this skill to test wisdom instead. Ooh, that could be good to more guarantee a kill. That actually might be really good. And then now the other thing that's a bonus with not using it for that is, oh, I guess I get to keep that technically because I don't have to discard it for that ability. Oh no, I do have to discard it for that ability. It says so in the description, or I can choose to discard it for sprint and move a space. So I kind of have an either or there. That's a tough call, but I really kind of want to do that. It's just 1 extra skill card though, so I don't know if it's worth it. I do have a ton of inspiration to burn. So you know what? Let's not get rid of it yet. We might need it later on. We're just going to bank on the fact that I can get hopefully 2 successes with 3 cards, which should be doable. And if it doesn't work out, I guess that's where I get into trouble, is I don't want to discard this. So maybe I do need to do this to kind of guarantee this kill, because I need 2 successes. And 3 cards on 2 successes is not exactly great odds. I do have the inspiration tokens to back me up. This is a tough one. I'm going to probably go ahead and let's do it. Let's discard this one, and we'll be able to use wisdom on this test instead. So here we go. Here's hoping that this pans out nice. It does say before you test. So here we go. This is now the test. We're using wisdom. So we get 4 cards. There's the first one. We can use an inspiration on it for a success. Second one, there's an inspiration to use for a success. So right there, we've got enough already to get the 5 hits we need. So that's fantastic. Now we're going into overkill or saving inspiration tokens, which is even better. So we just got 1 save and inspiration token, and that's all we'll get. So we only have to spend 1 in order to get the 2 successes that we need in order to activate the sword for 5 hits. And now we can head back to the app, put those 5 hits in, and Aragorn has sliced the head right off this guy. So now we'll go back to the app. We'll actually enter in the hits that we did with Aragorn. So we're going to click on the enemy in question. We're going to click that we're making an attack on this group. I have no extra abilities that are going to give benefits, and I'd love to talk about these later on with you guys in terms of what they mean. So maybe I'll show you the back of the rule book to give you a brief overview of what these mean, because they won't really come into play likely in this first scenario, but as the game progresses, better items might see these things come in. Of course, you get something like Pierce, you know it's going to go through armor and things like that, but most of the enemies we have right now just don't have that. So I did get 5 hits. You're watching the health just ticking right down there until bam, proves that that individual has now been sliced in half. And there we go. Remove 1 ruffian. You or a nearby hero gain 1 inspiration. And I know for a fact that I absolutely want Legolas to have this inspiration because he's hurting unit and needs all the help he can get on these tests. So I'm going to give 1 inspiration to Legolas, and we're going to continue on. This is actually going to technically end, and we just noticed there on the app that 1 lore just got dropped in for us. But we're also going to have to make note of the fact that we're near the end of a turn of actions, where our action phase is done. We've filled up as much as we can do. Now we're also seeing here, it says sudden movement draws your eye. To your surprise, a goblin breaks cover and sprints away, disappearing into a wall of brambles. You follow with haste and find beyond the thicket a wide valley dotted with a few ruins, but no sign of the creature. There's your lore increasing that we saw. So we'll continue onwards. Oh, now this is interesting. So maybe because we completed what we did, the world's now starting to kind of unfold for us. So that's quite interesting. So we have tile 209A to be placed here. So what we'll do is we'll jump out of the app, we'll give the inspiration token to Legolas, and we'll start unveiling more ground. And then after all this app stuff is finished, we're going to go down to the timer here and say that our action phase is complete. But we got to continue through this first. So Legolas will gain 1 token inspiration. And as you can see now, tile 209A has been added to the southern area of this map, just off to the west. Next, the app is instructing us to place tile 308A as indicated. This is really starting to branch out now. We are having a lot more area to discover. And there we go. We placed 308A now and branched out even further along. This is getting pretty wild. So with 308A in place, we'll continue forward. Look at that. We got some exploration tokens. So these zones, of course, we have to actually move into them before they're considered explored. So remember that even though the app might branch off into a path that you're not currently moved into, this is the reason for those exploration tokens, kind of pushing you down a trail of story and investigation as you try to find out what's going on. And the world's unveiling as you search, but there's a benefit to it as well. So these are considered unexplored tiles. We're going to go ahead and put those tokens in place and continue on. What has drawn such a creature here far beyond the reach of any orc stronghold? Its armor bore resemblance to that of Mount Graham, but far to the north does that mountain stand. A dark alliance has been formed indeed, for such a creature to be summoned here. You must find tracks leading to the enemy's lair to continue. Searching the surrounding area will yield the clues and tracks you need. We need to find 3 of those. So we'll go ahead now and place exploration tokens on this tile we just revealed and this one over here. Objective updated. Find clues to locate the hidden lair. Tracks needed 3. All right. So we got that, and it even referenced it up top if you happen to forget. We'll continue forward, and there we go. So that actually now has fully resolved the action phase, and we know that we have no more ability to actually spend any more actions. One other thing you might have noticed throughout the last couple clips there as we went back and forth to the game board when the tiles are being laid out is you might have noticed that the enemy that we killed is still in the shot. Don't worry, that enemy has been removed. It is beyond dead, and we're going to go ahead now and hit the hourglass and see what happens next. Do we want to end the action phase? Sadly, yes. This is when something terrible is probably going to happen. All right, here we go. The shadow deepens though hope yet endures, the threat increases by 6. All right, so things, we're getting up to that event. So again, we're saved by the fact there's no threat tokens on there, adding extra threat. We're also saved by the fact there's no enemies to activate. So we're doing a good job so far. I think we're doing as well as we could expect in terms of not allowing that phase to hurt us too much. Next up, it's saying we're going to go ahead and do our resetting of the deck. Again, I'm not going to show this going forward. I'm just going to do it, but we'll go ahead and show the scouting. Once we do the scouting, I think that's where we're going to end this episode because there was a lot of teaching in this one, and then we're going to go forward into the next one with less explanation and more gameplay progression. So let's go ahead now and continue and reset our decks, get our scouts 2 set up, and then move forward. So I'm going to hit continue here because we will be doing that, and we'll move straight into the action phase. So let's go ahead with our Scout 2 for Aragorn. We're going to flip 2 cards and see what we get. Okay, so we got Honed Agility. When you test your agility, you may discard this skill to add a success. Pretty good. Could be something worth, worth keeping. That could be something worth preparing, I should say. And oh yes, we got another one of these ones again. This is really handy. Before you test, you may discard the skill to test wisdom instead, which is my strongest trait. So you know what? I'm going to go back to going ahead and prepping this one again, I think, because that's just really, really handy when attacking. So I'm going to put that in my prepared area, and we're going to take Honed Agility. And you know what? I might even put it on top, just so that we can guarantee that we can at least get 1 success using an influence token. And then, you never know. We might get the 1 success we need underneath of it, depending on how many cards we're pulling. So not bad, not bad. So that is Aragorn all situated. We're going to go over to Legolas, do the same thing, and that will wrap up the episode. Here we go with our scout for Legolas. Okay, so we got one with 2 inspiration on it that we could use, but we don't even have that many tokens to use it fully anyway, but that could be something we could prepare. It says when you test, if you do not reveal any successes, you may discard this skill to convert all. Oh, that could be really good actually. That might be a perfect card to have on him, especially in a time of need that could be right now. And then the other one's Undying Might. When you test this one matches the horn, so it would be a might. You may discard this skill to add 1 success. So that's not bad, and it actually lines up for the one that we would need. So you know what I might do? Is I might put this one back on top because this will actually work good if I prepare this one. Plus, I already have the influence token. I keep calling this influence. I mean inspiration. And then that way, really, I have 2 ways to potentially have a success going on there. And this is really helpful later on, I think. The next video that comes, we'll see a lot more progression a lot quicker because I have less to explain. Now, we haven't seen everything yet. We haven't seen banners come into play. And we haven't seen maybe more advanced tactics for the attacking. There's still some things that we haven't actually broken into just yet, but the basics are there. The flow of the game is there, and now you guys at least understand how this thing moves. And you can see that once you learn the rules in terms of the flow, it becomes pretty smooth. You're moving pretty quick. So you could see how you could easily handle or potentially manage solo multiple characters. I could easily potentially have 3 or 4 people in here and managing a whole bunch of stuff going on at once. Of course, the app will scale to that as well. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next episode. And as always, keep on rolling solo.